On Being a Pagan. Alain de Benoist. Translated by John Graham, edited by Greg Johnson. 2004. Originally published in French under the title Comment peut-on, étre, paien? Under the pen name Albin Michel, 1981. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Chapter 10, Beneath and Beyond Good and Evil. The grammar of Judeo-Christian monotheism is not primarily religious, it is moral. The Bible is above all a moral book, at the same time as it is a book that expresses a certain morality, a book that characterizes the hyper-morality denounced by Arnold Gecklin. Judeo-Christianity sees everything through the lens of morality. In the final analysis, every sphere of human activity is brought back to morality. Aesthetics and politics, to name only two, lose all autonomy. In the order of human affairs, the Bible establishes the conditions necessary for nomocracy to appear. This primacy of morality makes it so that Yahweh is first a judge, a distributor of punishments, the judge of the whole earth, Genesis 18:25. In biblical language, furthermore, the moral prescription is inseparable from the realization of a divine plan. There is no imperative in the strict sense in the Hebrew language, it is the future that is used as a general rule to express it. The best way of saying this is Chad in the Bible, the you should is confused with the this will be. What should happen will happen, what man should submit to will be realized. There is no longer any place for the chance result of human actions. In the long term, history will necessarily culminate with the victory of morality. Christianity, says Nietzsche, is the most prodigal elaboration of the moral theme to which humanity has ever been subjected. Biblical morality is not, of course, deduced from a vision of the tangible world or from concrete experience as lived by human beings. It comes exclusively from the will of Yahweh and the prohibitions he has pronounced. Adam and Eve's transgression, as we have seen, consists of wishing to determine for themselves the criteria of good and evil. Now only Yahweh possesses this right. It is given that he alone defines what is good and what is evil and constitutes them into absolutes, and furthermore he is also the one who rewards or punishes. What befalls man befalls him necessarily with respect to the moral value of his actions. Such a system imprisons man within a problematic of unhealthy explanation. If there are, concretely, evil events, it is because there are, morally, evil actions. This is the source for guilt feelings and bad conscience. Far from abasing themselves and crucifying themselves by means of their beliefs, the Greeks, writes Nietzsche, to the contrary used their gods to protect them against any vague urge of guilty conscience, to have the right to play in peace with their freedom of soul. There is none of this in Judeo-Christian monotheism, which uses pain as one of the surest means to perpetuate its morality. Only that which never ceases to cause suffering remains in memory, observes Nietzsche again. The best way for Yahweh to be never forgotten is for him to inscribe himself in the human heart as a sign of unfulfillment, as suffering produced by sin. The priest explains suffering, illness, poverty, captivity by transgression. He suggests the ways it can be expiated. For him pain is the most powerful aid to memory. The Bible gives pain a poisonous explanation. If one is suffering, it is because one deserves to, it is because one has sinned. Pain is not only painful, it is also a sin of guilt. Accepting the principles of this guilt-inducing condition comes down to understanding the reasons suffering exists, an understanding that mitigates suffering somewhat, because it also lays out the hopeful principle of the sinner's redemption, a radical comprehension of his suffering in this world, but this also renders it interminable, by virtue of its inclusion within the most intrinsically perfect system for its reproduction. Why would biblical morality, in Nietzsche's words, constitute the most terrible illness that has ever raged among mankind? Because of the dualistic vision that supports it. Because it functions according to abstract categories without the slightest fundamental relation to the world. Because it imposes upon the world a code whose sources are outside of the world. Because it renders life foreign to itself and prevents it from realizing itself. Because it ruptures vital ardor and creative energy by imposing eternal limitations upon them. This overly exclusive reading of the human condition, for good and evil must obviously coexist, bursts the coherence and unity of life. Life finds itself divided piecemeal and split apart, in other words incapable of realizing itself. In this way morality defines life according to criteria that are not its own and are not determinative of its specific effectiveness. Such a problematic imposed on life from without prevents it from achieving its virtual qualities. Life no longer stems from its own creativity. By arbitrarily dictating laws that do not spring from its own legitimacy, that of its sensibility, morality forbids it from being itself. In Judeo-Christian monotheism, life is not valued according to its own problematic, but subjected to another. No longer will man be judged according to his law and his measure, but according to those of a something entirely other. This is why the progression of Christian morality in history can also be read as a decline in energy. Christian morality is burdened by resentment. The believer accepts his own debasement in exchange for the hope that others may also be debased. He adheres to a morality that suppresses diversity in the name of equality, that belittles in the name of justice, that curdles in the name of Jove. Such a morality is a system to dissipate energy, chip away at health, and destroy potency. It culminates, when all is said and done, with fusion and confusion, with entropy and death. It reveals itself, once identified, to be pure negation, like the death instinct. Here eros is merely the mask of Thanatos, for confronted with morality, especially Christian or unconditional morality, life must continually and inevitably be in the wrong, writes Nietzsche, because life is something essentially amoral, and eventually, crushed by the weight of contempt and the eternal no, life must then be felt to be unworthy of desire and altogether worthless. Morality itself, how now? Might not morality be a will to negate life, a secret instinct of annihilation, a principle of decay, diminution, and slander, the beginning of the end? Pagan man is by nature innocent. Certainly over the course of his life he will have responsibilities to assume. One or another of his actions, by implicating him in a situation or confirmation of given facts, may cause a feeling of guilt to arise within him. But this feeling always results from voluntary choices he has made. Man does not inherit at birth any guilt, any imperfection bound to his very condition, other than those of his psychic or physiological limitations, which are exempt from moral implications. He is at the onset pure innocence, innocence incarnate. And he puts this innocence into serious action like a child puts it into play. To transform action into a game. Because only the game is truly serious, the game of man, the game of being, the game of the world. The game is fundamentally innocent, beyond good and evil. When he describes the Trojans' assault on the wall the Achaeans erected to protect their camp, Homer himself compares the actions of the gods to the games of children. Monerland said that the game is the sole form of activity that should be taken seriously. Lastly, Schiller declares, man is not fully man except when he plays. This is why it is the child who is the closest of all people to the Superman. The world of the Superman, to paraphrase Monerland, is a world whose prince is a child. It is a world instituted beyond good and evil, a world where the moral sense of action is a matter of indifference with respect to the action itself. To desire indifferently, Monerland says, is the very essence of play. Edificabo ad destruum. Morality in the Bible always has the scope of an ontological foundation. In Judaism it is the law, the Torah, upon which the core role is conferred. This is the means by which original sin can be corrected and with it the evil tendency that caused it. From the moment there were two worlds, that of the created being and that of the non-created being, the problem of their articulation was raised. This problem is resolved in the Old Testament by the covenant and by the fact of the law. Genesis 1:26-32 says that man was created on the sixth day at the end of a series of 5, which rabbinical tradition generally identifies with the 5 books that make up the Torah. The sixth day would then symbolize man's acceptance of the Torah as a meaningful prelude to the day of Yahweh's Sabbath. Several commentators furthermore observe that in this Genesis story, only the sixth day is designated with an article, the sixth day. With regard to the others it says, day 1, day 2, etc. It so happens that the numerical value of the article in Hebrew is 5. According to Rachi, this means that it is on condition of Israel accepting the 5 books of the Torah that it is able to have a sixth day. A midrash even proclaims that in Che beginning, God read the Torah and created the world. The question of knowing whether the essence of the monotheist revelation resides in the idea of the law or that of creation is still a matter of debate, incidentally. Against the Judaism of the later Kabbalistic schools, rabbinical teachings are more prone to hold to the former solution. The phrase here are the laws, alei bamishpatim, would thus denote the true beginning of time. The fact is that when Yahweh presents himself to Adam for the first time, he does not introduce himself as the creator of the world but as the author of morality. When he speaks, he is not making theological pronouncements, he is delivering speech with a moral value, a commandment. When he addresses Adam for the first Yumi, Genesis 2:16-17, it is to formulate a prohibition. Likewise, in Exodus, when the Lord declares to Moses that he is his God, 20:2-3, it is to pronounce the 10 phrases that make up the 10 commandments. This gives the impression that the story of the creation is only provided in order to force acceptance of moral speech. It was necessary for Yahweh to be the author of the world in order for the whole world to submit to him. Truth finds itself by this same stroke separated from justice. The affirmation of a self-evident truth is only the means for realizing a certain kind of justice. The law's ultimate finality is an imitation of Yahweh, be holy, because I, Yahweh your God, am holy, Leviticus 19:2. Emmanuel Levinas goes so far as to write, we love the Torah more than God, Then adds, the essence of Judaism is the destruction of man's natural religious tendencies and the development of an ethical approach to reality. Contrary to paganism, which is more apt to deduce the ethical as well as religion from a sublimation of human activities, the Bible seems to deduce religion from morality and even infers the existence of Yahweh from the fact that Torah exists. There is a kind of equivalence between Yahweh and the Torah. If you honor the words, it is as if you honor God; if you scorn them, it is as if you are scorning God. By virtue of this, the practice takes on the appearance of an imitatio Dei, which in the extreme, could paradoxically make God superfluous. This line of reasoning is pushed to an absurd extreme by Bernard-Henri Lévy, according to whom the radical non-existence of God is the supreme meaning of Jewish existence. The judgment delivered by certain Christian theologians on Judaism is not so far from this opinion. It has also been pointed out that classical Hebrew has no specifically equivalent word for the terms religion and religious. Erich Fromm, for his part, ordains certain interesting developments to the opposition between the moral man and the religious man, or even to the distinction between the authoritarian ethic still colored with idolatry, and the humanist ethic that determines in the very absence of God a type of specifically Judeo-Christian consciousness. Here we find again the opposition between holiness and the sacred. The first is on the side of morality, the second is on the side of religion. Some contemporary neo-Marxists have only gone a little further than this by disassociating not only morality from religion but also morality from a belief in a personal God. Let's not be misled. By raising the figure of Dionysius in opposition to the crucifixion, Nietzsche, whom Heidegger described as the last German philosopher to have sought for God with passion and suffering, is not opposing religion with religion's absence. He is opposing a true religion, a true sense of the sacred, to the degradation of religion under the exclusive form of morality. We know that the notion of law is viewed differently in Christianity. The most fundamental distinction between the teachings of Jesus, at least as presented in the Gospels, and those of traditional Judaism, regarding the emphasis on the affairs of this world and the kingdom of heaven, is the relative separation of morality and the law. Without impugning the spirit of the law, Jesus did challenge the letter of the law and declared that individual conscience by itself could serve as a guide for achieving truth. This is Che meaning of the phrase, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath," Mark 2:27-28. Clearly opposing grace to law, which the Old Testament viewed as combined, see Psalms 119:29, St. Paul declared that the law only represented a temporary stage, a transitional stage from which the coming of Christ, the Messiah, had freed humanity. "Do not believe that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets," Jesus said, "I have not come to abolish but to fulfill them," Matthew 5:17. With St. Paul, this fulfillment is taken in the sense of the Greek telos, which combines the ideas of achievement with finality. The law, St. Paul said, was not valid literally until Jesus who, by achieving it, rendered it useless. Karl Marx later developed a similar kind of analysis of the bourgeois revolution of 1789, presenting it as a positive and useful stage, but one communism claims to have surpassed, and it even attacks those who wish to remain at this stage. Henceforth Christ's law simply replaces the law, which is now sclerotic. Grace carries the ancient law to a higher dimension. Baptism replaces circumcision as phrygus, the mark of belonging. Paul will even go so far as to define Christianity as an ant-law. "You have broken from Christ who seek justice in the law, you have fallen from grace," Galatians 4:5. Although Paul's doctrine on this subject could often be contradictory, these are the most critical aspects retained by the Church during the greatest part of its history, to conform to its own vision of the law. And it was not until recently that it began revising this domain as it has also revised others.